Okay, hey folks, Mark Locklear here, and quick screencast on chapter 5. I think this is going to go fairly quickly. I mean, this, my opinion, the content is pretty straightforward. So, but we'll just hit the high points. So, pretty basic, how to insert, update, and delete. So, up to this point, we've only selected data, right? We're running queries, and then we're just viewing the results that have already been populated in the database. But that leads to the obvious question: well, how do we get data in the database in the first place? And then that's what the insert, update, and delete functions do to us. Now, consequently, in fact, it's probably worth showing. Let me student setup. If you looked at the setup in the student download files, book scripts, or actually DB setup. If you look in here, and so if you remember at the beginning of class, we ran a bunch of update statements that actually loaded data into the databases for us. If you actually go back to those and look, so for instance, the AP database is generally the one that we use. Let's open that. You can see these are, you'll see a lot of the same sort of update and possibly alter or yeah, the update statements we initially created. I think we're going to get to create statements a little later. Those actually create the create the attributes or configure the actual databases themselves. But if we scroll on down here, notice all of these are insert statements, right? These are all the, for instance, this is the general ledger accounts table. Notice all this data that we're inserting in there. Notice we've got insert into terms, insert into vendors. So this is not the first time we've used this. Again, when we initially populated these databases, we use these kind of statements there too. Okay. Close this. Make this a little bigger. All right, I just got a couple things bookmarked here. So first thing we'll look at is the a sort of standard standard insert statement. So notice they're looking at the column definitions here first again, and if we sort of look at our, it's a little bigger. Let's use AP underscore student. And for instance, if we look at invoices, so these are going to be the same things we see here, right? These invoice ID, vendor ID, invoice number, etc. Those are going to be the same things that we see here. And this is just a typical sort of insert statement. Now notice the difference in these, and I want to make sure we understand that this first one here, and again, the book goes into detail about this. Notice this first statement doesn't specify the columns that this data is to be inserted into. So we can do it this way. However, there are a couple of caveats, rules that you have to follow. Number one, every field has to have a value that's going to be inserted into it. And then number two, it has to be in the correct order that the columns are for the database you're going to be inserting it into. So if you recall, we talked about, and again, it's going to be, I'll keep harping on it because I keep coming back to it, and it's just a fact of life. There can be no ambiguous statements in SQL, right? So the way we take the ambiguity out of it with this insert statement without columns is that, again, all of the columns have to have data, because if you skip a column, then you're going to be trying to insert, for instance, this second to the last column is invoice date. If you leave null off the end, then you're going to actually, well, if you skip terms ID, then invoice date, you'd be trying to insert into the terms ID field. And in fact, you would get an error there because invoice date is the type of the column is a date field, and you'd be, or the terms ID, it's an integer field. You'd be trying to insert a date into an integer field. Of course, MySQL would not like that. So, again, these. And in fact, if we just copy from here, and then if we paste this in here, So MySQL doesn't give you a ton of feedback. This is actually pretty generous for what MySQL normally does. Notice the feedback it gave me when the query was executed was query okay, one row affected. So that's pretty good, right? I mean, you know, I guess there's other things it could be. I just make this note to say that there's times you do things in MySQL and it doesn't give you, it'll only give you an error if something's wrong, but it doesn't give you any positive feedback when something's right. So that's just number one. Number two, in the exercises, I'm going to be asking you, especially in the My Guitar Shop exercises, I'm asking you to, in addition to solving whatever the exercise is, whatever coming up with the solution, I'm also asking you to include a select statement that sort of proves that the statement that you ran was executed successfully. So what does that mean? Well, in this case, I've inserted into the invoices table these values. So an easy one here, like 115 is going to be the invoice ID. I can just say select from invoices, select star, from invoices where invoice underscore ID equals, and in this case, 115, because that's the insert we just did. And if I run that, sure enough, you know, 115, 97, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, these are all there. So that's when I say run it, when I say to include a select statement that verifies the insert statement you did, that this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, because we just inserted this data. Now we're going to run a select statement on it. If we tried to run that select statement before we did this insert, you would get an error back, right? You get something like, if I say where invoice is, I'm assuming there's not a 2. Let's see. You know, you'd get something like this that said empty set, right? It didn't return anything. So that's what I'm talking about when I asked you to create a select statement like that. Okay. And again, just the example we use there doesn't have the column values. This has specific column values. Now, what I could do here is I could do the same insert statement and I could remove some of these. Let's say I didn't want to put a terms ID in there. That's not something I would want to do, but I could leave that out. Let's do that real quick just so you can see. Sublime. Sublime. Dot. There we go. If I do, again, just want a blank. Just want a blank, something I could paste here. So for instance, I can paste this statement in, copy. Let's say I wanted to leave, I mean, all of these are critical values, but just say, just hypothetically, we could remove, in this case, it's the second to the last value, so it's going to be invoice date. So I'm going to remove that, and then I could remove invoice date. And then that would be a valid query that I could run, right? Whereas, again, in the example up here where I don't include column names, I have to have a value for each column that exists in the table, because, again, since I don't have a column list there, the requirement is that you have to have one for each column that you've got. Okay. All righty, let's look at, so that's insert statements. Let's look at update statements. This is also insert statement here too. So here, here what they're doing is, notice they've got a select, they're actually running a select statement, and then based on that select statement, they're going to be inserting new data. So in this case, insert into invoice archive, then you're going to do select star from invoices. So you're selecting everything from invoices, and then based on, you've got a where clause here based on this mathematical statement where they've got here. And then the other example they've got is so the same statement with a column list. So here again, inserting into invoice archive, you're choosing the specific columns you want to insert into, running your select statement, and then again you've got that based on a where clause. Okay, next we've got here is update. So that was inserting. So all update is doing is updating an existing row based on the query. So for instance, in this case, we're going to be updating the invoices table. We're going to modify payment date and payment total with these values, and then which invoices specifically are you going to update. So in this case, it's the one with this 97.52522. So just as an example, I'll go back here. So this is going to be invoice number. So I could say, so we can see it. Select star from invoices, where in this case it's invoice number equals. Now notice what I'm doing here. Notice I'm using quotes. And then, so, in this case, this would be the row that I'm going to be updating. So like, I mean, I just show this as an example. Sometimes it's nice to, in fact, let's do it now. We've ran this select statement. We can see what the values are here. I'm now going to run this update statement, and we should be able to see a change. So then I'm going to paste that in. All right, it says rows matched 1, and it changed 1. Now, again, I'm just hitting the up arrow. If I go back and run this select statement again, let's see. Well, so notice this select statement actually, let's see, where's invoice? Okay. So because, did our invoice number change? It didn't. Okay, let me. Okay, sorry, I was sort of thrown off there. If you notice, again, I'm using the up arrow just to go back to previous queries. If it's a multi-line query like we have, it often puts a single query. You've got multiple lines. Anyway, I'm going to run this select statement again. And so now if we compare these, notice that our payment total is changed. Let me go back and look at the query here. Yeah, notice, yeah, we updated the payment total and the payment date. So if we come back here, and again, I'm looking at these two values here. So notice our payment total updated, and then the payment date was set to 9/21. So payment date over here, notice this has changed too. So again, this is this idea of, it's kind of nice sometimes to look at a query first, see what the data is, make the change, run a select query again, just a sanity check that what you were intending to change did change. I mean, yeah, you run a query, if it runs correctly like we see here, it shows you that, okay, yeah, this query ran and it made an update. It doesn't necessarily tell you what you updated. So that's where running the select query can be helpful for that. Okay. And then the last one I have here is just simply the delete statement. So again, pretty straightforward. You're having to remove rows. You're removing rows of data from the database. So yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. I mean, one of the things to think about, I'll sort of stop here, is that, we're doing all these, again, think about these larger systems, Facebook and Google. as you're running these queries, think about the number of updates, the number of inserts, the number of updates, and the number of deletes that happen, not just on a daily basis, but like on a minute by minute basis, right? Think about Facebook. Every time somebody makes a new Facebook post, or think about Twitter or Instagram. Every time someone makes a new post, that's a new database update, or that's a new database insert, I should say, that's happening somewhere. Again, go back to our first class we had where we had the image of, the client, the cloud, which is the internet, and then the database server that was sort of hanging off that cloud. There's some server somewhere in a data center that's handling all those inserts, updates, and deletes, on a constant basis. And and it's pretty amazing too. I mean, when you think about, again, when we think about something like Facebook, Instagram that large, that you're probably talking about millions of new inserts that are happening every minute, right? Think about all the fields that are attached to each one of those inserts. You've got a user that's associated with it. You've probably got a title, which is the text. You've got images that might be associated with it. You've got location data. Think about, you can check in Facebook, so you've got maps and location data that's being associated with that. So it'd be interesting. That might be a good exercise to think about, like an insert query on a single Facebook post. How many different pieces of data are there that are associated with that? Okay, that's all for now, folks. As always, if you have questions, let me know.